questions for any of our agencies?
I want to thank you for all the information you provided here this evening. One of my concerns that hasn't been addressed is, do you have a contingency plan should the methane gas leak be interrupted by a major magnitude 8.0 earthquake? Or could that well be sealed with cement, as we understand it's happening, and a magnitude 8 earthquake reopen that methane gas leak?
I think for at least our agency, I mean, again, we're dealing with primarily the air monitoring measurement. So if a large event were to happen, we do have kind of an emergency response plan. We work with the county fires, we work with other first responding agencies if a emergency nature action were to occur, and especially if there was air release involved. Now, as far as like the material for it's inside the well, that's probably not our area of expertise. I don't know if public health.
I just wanted to say that I agree completely with what Jason just said about the agencies being able to work together in emergencies. But with regard to the question about what about the well once it's plugged, if there was an earthquake, we really need to have the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, or DOGGR here, the state, to speak to that issue.
It's a big concern because everything that I've read about magnitude 8 talks about devastation and living outdoors for 2 weeks or longer, and you can't do that when there's a methane gas in the area. So that's a concern because the contingency plans no longer apply, and that's why I'm asking the question.
It is a great question, and we need to get an answer for that, and we'll have the state do it. Bill, is there anything you wanted to add to this?
Well, I think it goes to all of us in this community preparing for these kinds of rare events. And there's a lot of information out there about what we need to do. From the fire department's perspective, we plan and we drill on these kinds of events all the time. It's not going to be perfect when it happens because an 8.0 is a pretty significant event. But we will do our best within, the confines of whatever that event is to deal with what outcomes occur. If you recall in the Northridge earthquake, we had train derailment, we had a pipeline issue in Rinaldi down the street. We had a major oil spill up in the North County. We dealt with all those things as they occurred. But I think I agree with my co-presenters here that when it comes to whether or not that seal, that concrete that's going to be poured down into the well will hold in that kind of situation, DOGGR is probably the better entity to address that.
And I have, my sleeping bag at home, I have water at home, I have food at home, but I'm not there. And should a methane gas leak occur, we're supposed to be able to live outside, camp outside, according to what I've been reading.
Right, and believe me, we relate to the question you're asking, because what you're saying really is there's something unique in your neighborhood, aside from the general hazards that we have whenever there's an earthquake. We have these general hazards that most of us are familiar with. But I think what your question is, what about here, given the fact that we have these wells, what will happen to those wells in a major earthquake? And we'll get the state here to comment on that, okay?
When?
We'll talk with them right away. I mean, one of your upcoming meetings, they're here frequently now, so we should be able to have them at your next meeting.
One of the questions, though, it doesn't really involve us, we'll probably stay till the end, but I've seen neighbors complaining about their housing values have gone down. They can't refinance. This has been, not because they don't have the money or anything, it's not their fault. So what is going to happen to those people? Our neighbor has had her house for sale 10 months, and normally the house is moved within a month, and this is gone. What are we going to do about that?
I'm sorry.
I know it's not your...
Well, it's not only, we're just not qualified to comment on that, but we can bring somebody back. We'll make arrangements to have somebody come and speak to you on that subject as well.
See, we're being punished because of the gas, and maybe some ruling that they cannot exclude or discriminate against Porter Ranch in a sale that has to be brought up to the realtors or the board.
I think
And
as,
say,
I think those conversations are happening. I want to make sure that we use their time wisely, and then we only ask questions directly related to their expertise, because it's frustrating for them, and it's going to be frustrating for us. So just be honest if that's something, and we'll just continue to move on.
I have a question.
yes.
Okay. Well, we breathe those chemicals every day. I know you said that the level is pretty low, but if we breathe every day, day after day, for such a long time, it adds up. What do I do? I cannot get any health information. There's no communication with the doctor. I have a Kaiser, and their attitude is, oh, our doctors live in Porter Ranch. If you don't feel well, then just relocate. I was asking, what kind of a test should I have? What should I do to check myself if I have already something in me? What should I do maybe in the future, in a year or half a year? I can't get any answer. I can't get any help. And maybe you, doctor, mentioned a little bit that I overheard. Maybe Kaiser and another groups should be educated, and they shouldn't give me or us answer, all our doctors live there. If you don't feel well, move on. This is not a medical help. So my question is, can I get specific answer? I'm with Kaiser, I can't go to you, for example. Can I check myself?
Yes,
And one more quick question. You mentioned also it's like follow-up. After everything is done and sealed and finished, you said the chemicals stay in the air for some time. For how long?
Okay, so let me go back to your first question and handle the second one. I'm going to let Dr. Rangan talk about talking to your medical practitioner, because he gets called in a lot to talk with doctors who aren't familiar with the types of things we're talking about here. And he's able to give them the counseling that they need to properly diagnose your concerns. But with regard to the first question you had, where you said, is it okay, we say the numbers are relatively low and comparable to the standards, but is it okay to breathe it for long periods of time? Keep in mind that the standards that we put up there are standards assuming that you would breathe these chemicals for a very long time, for years in fact. And if you're below those numbers, like the 1 part per billion that we had up there, it is safe to breathe it as long as it's below that number, the 1 part. And so for benzene, for example, it is below there, and it's assuming that if you were breathing that for a very long period of time, a matter of years, you would still not have an elevated risk of developing illness.
But I disagree with that, because why do we have headaches? Why do we have dizziness? Why do we have all these symptoms? I'm looking at this graph earlier going, okay, if I didn't know any better and I walked off the street, I'd say, okay, yeah, it's business as usual. But for my whole life, I've never had these symptoms. All of a sudden, this thing breaks out. All of a sudden, my wife's got rashes. My black lab dies of a flesh-eating bacteria out of nowhere. I got headaches. I'm dizzy. Come on, man. I mean, I'm not, that graph earlier, you guys are watering it down. I'm not buying that we're, because I got a super sensitive nose, I'm all of a sudden getting these symptoms. It just sounds like you guys are minimizing it and watering it down.
No, we don't want to do that, but we were...
That's what it sounds like.
I know, but we were responding to a specific question about if we say the benzene levels are below the level. And you're talking about other symptoms that I think...
Well, the symptoms you have on your chart.
Exactly, and I think Dr. Rangan had mentioned that those are due to the odors, and those are undeniable. You are suffering those symptoms. I'm going to let him comment further.
So, just as Angela just said, when it comes to these, comes to the symptoms that have been reported to us, primarily they're related to those sulfur odorants. And when I say odorants, I emphasize the odor part of this because, as I mentioned before, these are present in extraordinarily low levels. In fact, levels that are escaping the limit of detection of our instruments. And they're designed to be that way. They're designed to be smelled at extraordinarily low levels. So what we're not talking about is a toxic buildup of these chemicals in your body. What we are talking about is your physiological reaction to the odor. And when I say physiologic reaction, I'm talking about real symptoms. All that symptoms on that list there, the nausea, the headaches that you mentioned as well, all of those things are real symptoms, but they do vary quite significantly from person to person. As I mentioned, we've talked to a lot of homeowners who say, I don't smell anything, my husband does smell something, but he's fine, but then our teenage daughter smells something and she wants to throw up all the time. And so those are the kinds of variations that we're seeing even within the same household. So that's something that is expected when you're talking about odors like this. So it's not just a question of someone having a super sensitive nose, it's more about your body's constitution and how you are reacting to those odors when they occur. So there is that variation, they are real symptoms, and when it comes to the issue of medical providers providing you care for that, what I can tell you is this. I think one of your questions in your series was about testing yourself. Is there things that can be done to check yourself or things like that? There are no blood tests or tests of your urine or tests of body tissues that are useful in a situation like this. So in any of these situations, especially with these kinds of chemicals, no, there aren't any body tests that can be done to make a determination about whether your symptoms are coming from the gas leak or whether you have a risk for another symptom in the future. Those don't exist. But what I can tell you is this. We know that if people are experiencing odors and those symptoms at the same time, and especially when they tell us that, when I leave the area, I start to feel a little bit better, that's enough for us to say that, yeah, you've got symptoms that are recurring because of the gas leak, and most likely related to the sulfur odorants. As for the medical providers, just as we mentioned, a lot of these medical providers may not be completely familiar with what these chemicals are, what they do to people, and what to expect in their patients when they actually occur. So we have done a lot of outreach with medical providers. I've talked to many of them individually about general issues about this, also about specific patient issues as well. For my advice directly to you would be, if you want to have your medical provider call me directly to discuss your particular case, I'd be happy to do that. I'm doing that for lots of folks in the area as well. And that goes for every one of you here. If you want to have your medical provider call me to discuss your case or your particular situation or your children's situation directly, I'm happy to do that. And I'm also happy to come back and talk in general to medical providers, just about our general impressions about this as well. We've also sent them out what is called an LAHAN, so it's an Area Health Network notification that has gone out to all the medical providers in the area, it's essentially by email from the Public Health Department. We use this system to alert medical providers about new things that are happening, like, for example, the Zika virus that we've been hearing about. So we also use it for this particular situation as well, to give them guidelines about how to take care of their patients as well. So you're sure to receive that, but I'm happy to talk through them in more depth as well.
And the last part was
I'm
how
sorry,
long the chemicals will stay in the air? How long?
Oh, that's a good question.
How long?
We're going to find out because we're going to be monitoring it. We think it should be a matter of days, but we won't know until we examine the monitoring that we're doing. Then we'll be able to tell you for sure. We're going to go to these two gentlemen in a minute, but sir, just one more comment on your point about you're experiencing these real symptoms. Yes, you are, and let me just assure you, the Public Health Department is not going to be satisfied with that the conditions have been restored to normal until you're no longer feeling these symptoms. The problem is not solved until those symptoms are gone. And we're with it for the duration. We're not trying to minimize it, I assure you. Yes, back there in the black shirt.
So what you just said, that you're not going to be happy until the symptoms are gone, but you already said that you're going to have people move back into their homes after the well is sealed and you don't have any more odors in the air. But the problem, the reason you did the move out, the relocation order, is because people are getting sick. You saw a spike in that. So how come it's not reverse? Hey, when people stop complaining about illness, then we go back to our homes. You've inserted this other arbitrary, which you just said is a criteria that people are sick, but that's not a criteria for us to move back into our home.
Yeah, let me explain that because I don't think it's inconsistent. But let's just explain it. Remember, as Dr. Rangan said, we didn't issue a mandatory relocation. It was mandatory on the gas company, but it was voluntary for those individuals because, as Dr. Rangan said, some people were not affected to the point where they couldn't stand it and they needed to be relocated. So we were addressing those that were affected by the symptoms And if some of them have come back and said, I don't smell anything anymore, I'm not experiencing these symptoms, is it safe for me to remain? And our answer is yes. If you're not experiencing any symptoms, you try it out. Stay in your home for a while and see whether or not there's any, if your symptoms come back. If your symptoms come back, then it means that it was necessary for you to relocate from the area. But it is safe when you're no longer being affected by the symptoms.
But we won't be having a choice to check that out. We have 8 days for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can't speak to the 8 days. All I can tell you is that when we were asked, what do we need to do to provide greater assurance to the community? Our answer was, we need to continue to look at the air quality data. Remember, we get a new round of data every week and we analyze it. We need to do that for several subsequent rounds of data, and that's why Supervisor Antonovich had asked for a 30-day period. It was timed with us being able to have several subsequent cycles of looking at the data. And we're still going to be looking at the data, and I'm just telling you that if we find people are experiencing symptoms and they're being affected like they were earlier and even now, we're going to be working to get you the relief that you need. And if that's temporary relocation, that's what the health department is going to be pushing for.
So we're going to start all over again, in other words.
I hope not.
Okay,
None of us hope that.
Another question about the illnesses. Dr. Rangan said our noses are a better detector, and so I guess that applies to our whole physiology, is a better detector of what chemicals or whatever are in the air. So you say you're going to check for odors and look at all those various measurements. But we're hearing right now from a lot of people that have made various trips back home, including 2 people in my own home, that we come back and we don't smell anything. And we get very sick. It's the sickest I've been 2 days ago when I was in my house for a few hours. I didn't even smell anything.
Well,
And Save Porter Ranch, I'm the president of Save Porter Ranch, we're dialed in. We're dialed in to the social media. I don't know if you guys are, but we're talking to the people who are actually living here, actually having the problems. We're not looking at those numbers. And there's a vast number of people that are saying we don't smell anything when we're in our house and we're getting sick. How do you apply that? How do you explain that one? Sicker.
we are, just to
I just
clarify.
want to say something right now.
Yeah.
I haven't smelled anything, and I've been at the
Look at
doctor.
right there.
I am sicker, and they won't even relocate my husband and I to a place that we feel it's a home away from home, beyond a 100-mile radius. I was on the phone with the judge again today, for the first time today. We are getting nowhere, and we do not smell it.
Right now we don't smell it. Look at her.
I'm sicker. I'm dizzy. I was diagnosed with hypoglycemia when I was 20 years old. I'm in my 50s, and this is the first time in my life that I've not been able to control it. I am sick, and they won't even let us go to Bishop, California. It's not Hawaii. It's not a glamorous place. It's where he and I go feeling like it's home away from home, but it's beyond a 100-mile radius. I'm sicker, and we did lose our dog to a skin disorder at the onset of this gas leak. She was sick, and she would lay out in the back because she couldn't come in the house all the time because she was weak, and she died at the onset of this gas leak. And I feel like I have the same thing our sweet dog died from. I know I don't, but just like, it's Matt, right?
Yes.
He is our hero. We've gone to a lot of meetings, and we've had attorneys that have hosted meetings, and your scale, I'm not talking well because I don't feel well, but what we see here is completely different than the separate, independent air studies. This is why we sit in here. We want to hear from you, but it's night and day studies from what we've been hearing from specialists that have been hired by people that have a lot of money, yes, in these law firms. So I'm saying to you, like what he's saying, I don't smell it now, but I'm worse. I'm worse.
I got 2 words. We probably all have 2 words. Flint, Michigan.
With regard to your particular story, I would very much love to be able to speak with you afterwards so we can discuss.
My
more issues
husband's a
about
Los
your
Angeles City firefighter and captain, and he has to go home and go to sleep. He wakes up at 5.
I'll tell you what.
And this is his first time at a meeting, actually, because he's worked a lot. So I just want you to know, he works for the community. We've been a community member, and it is maddening. It's maddening. And I had to talk to a woman named Suzette from Southern California Gas today. She's minimizing my situation. saying to me, oh, you can't go to Georgia because it's, I go,